USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Edge for Friday, December 15th, 2023. I'm Ed Trefzger along with Jim Connelly and Dan Rubin. Well, before we get into today's topic, which is looking at the NCAA futures, because there are no betting lines this weekend for college hockey games, let's revisit one from last weekend. If people had listened, they could have made some money on it. It was Colorado College at North Dakota. 300 plus 300 was CC in that game. And they on Friday and duplicated on Saturday, 3-2 overtime wins. Some of the scenarios that we said had to happen happened for that win to take place. Would that have been, well, obviously in hindsight, it would have been a great bet. Would that have been a good one to make then?
Well, I made a case in my column that I wrote Friday morning that it was, if you're actually a bettor and you're a sharp bettor, you realize that line was off. It should never have been minus 450 plus 300. And that's what it was on Friday morning. It shouldn't be there. The Colorado College was not that far behind in terms of, the expectation for goals and all of that sort of stuff. They were in a position that they certainly should have been an underdog, but no more than plus 180, I would have said. So when I saw plus 300, that just stood out to me as way too high. And those are the bets. You don't win them all, but you make them if you're a sharp bettor, because you know that the house is laying money. So that if you're going to win that bet, you're going to win almost two times what you really should have won. So you go ahead and make that bet just because you have an edge. That's what you're always supposed to be looking for as a bettor, is an edge. And that was one I thought, I said it was almost impossible to lay off of. It was a must bet in my mind. So if you did bet it, and then I don't know that I would have gone along with doing it twice in a row, back-to-back nights. Especially seeing that North Dakota does not typically lose back-to-back home games. But if you did it, you bet it both nights in a row, or maybe even, did a non-parlay. You took your winnings from game one and then put 300 down on game two. That would have been a pretty nice weekend for you, winning back-to-back. I assume the odds the next night, I never looked at them, but I assume the odds were probably somewhere in that plus 300 range, maybe a little shorter, plus 250, but I guarantee they were somewhere in there again.
Yeah, I think the problem with the odds, and we talk all the time about how the algorithms and statistics and everything kind of break along the way. Like there's always one break in for a game where you look at the odds and you say something went wrong in the algorithm. I think part of, or the odds makers, if there's a human versus AI, I think part of the issue that faces some of these teams in college hockey is that you have a subsegment of fans, depending on, we talked about this with Notre Dame or with some of the bigger name schools a few weeks back, where there's always going to be a certain amount of action of fans who decide to bet for their team. And what the odds makers try to do is, when they set lines and lines get set, is that they try to set it so that someone will bet the other side. And so you're trying to shift the odds so that they don't lose any money.
Yeah,
I think
liability.
The liability. I think the issue with the line being that big was that we know North Dakota has a massive following, and we know that there is a higher likelihood of more fans, as North Dakota has been winning, betting on North Dakota to win. So you have to set the line at almost an area where you don't want them. And so you set it so incredibly big that it entices people who are looking at it, saying who watch college hockey or follow college hockey, to say, well, I have to bet Colorado College. I'd be interested to see kind of where lines start to line up as a team. If a team like North Dakota goes on a heater in the second half of the season, like, do they wind up with larger lines as favorites because of the amount of action that may or may not be happening? That could be something that you can use to kind of trace and say, all right, if North Dakota is always minus 250 at a bare minimum, that as they're winning and as they're staying in, say, the top four in the country, top one or two in the league, then you know that when the lines drop, it's because they're trying just to entice
Well, let's
action
take a
on the other
look
side.
at some of the futures going forward. And these are the odds for a team to win the national championship. And they're all very much in the plus because, they're all, every single one of them is kind of a long shot. I mean, you've got 60 teams or so that are eligible and probably 15 of them who have a legitimate shot at the top, maybe 20. So let's kind of split this up in our first segment here. We'll take a look at teams that have moved up in this since we last looked at this on October 30th. And probably the first place to start is the team that we were just talking about, and that is North Dakota. They've gone from plus 2,000 to plus 750. Only one team ahead of them right now, and that's BU at plus 650.
Yeah, it's one that you wish you bet back in October because the value is kind of lost on that line right now. You were talking 20-1 as opposed to 7.5-1, which is today's odds. But this is the reaction. This is a market correction to the success that North Dakota's had, and I can only imagine if they had not lost those two to Colorado College last week, and they might be somewhere closer to plus 550 instead of plus 750. So a little bit of a market correction there, but it's one you're going to see. It does show that if you have some inkling of where a team is going to head back in October, that's the time to make the wager. There might be some teams still that you could take a look at right now and say, okay, now is the time. This team is way too low. They're plus 5,000, but they should really be plus 2,500. If you're really looking at maybe the schedule that remains, whatever it might be, it takes a lot of work to bet these futures. This is not something where you just throw a dart at a dartboard. If you do, that's the losing bet. Sometimes you'll win on it. I get it, but you need to do a little bit of research. What's happened with this team? Why are they in a position they are right now? And what would get them in a better position? That's always kind of the question you have to ask.
Yeah, I think when you look at the odds of a futures bet and you see teams start to drop, if you follow this over the course of 2 months or a month or however it goes, the team that gets hot doesn't necessarily get better odds. It's about enticing action. It's about, as the odds drop, as more people start to bet it, you wind up watching the odds drop. And I think North Dakota is a prime example of a team that, if you go back to the beginning of the season, didn't have the recency bias on its side. I would not have thought North Dakota would have been even close to a national championship contender this year. I would have liked to have seen them take a step somewhere along the way. But I know that in late October, early November, I don't remember who I had the conversation with, but I said, ooh, North Dakota's back. Like, at that moment, you start to realize that North Dakota, now you're going back to the bias of maybe 10 years ago, where you say, okay, this North Dakota team's for real. And for that reason, the odds may not even drop from plus 2,000 to plus 750 and go gradually. It may be the correction of saying, okay, we'll mark it down to plus 1,800 this week. But then one week you go, oh, they really kicked the snot out of the right team. Boom, plus 750, and it drops almost automatically when they become number one. There are teams that happens with. It's not always incremental. So you're right, Jimmy. You have to try to aim it and aim the dart at the right time, which is when you get that realization that a team is for real. You can't have it too late. You need to have it too early, which is what makes the futures betting almost impossible, because everyone seems to realize that a team's for real at the same time.
Well, one team that has become for real is Wisconsin. They're plus 800 along with BC. They're both behind North Dakota. When we looked back in October, Wisconsin was plus 3,000. So there's quite a move there for the Badgers. No surprise, I don't think. What Mike Hastings has been doing there with that team is really pretty remarkable.
And if my memory was right from that, I believe that the start of the season, opening day of the season, Wisconsin was plus 15,000. So they've gone from plus 15,000 to plus 3,000 to plus 800. Obviously, a coach and some transfer players really can make a difference, and that is what we've seen with Wisconsin. this is one that if they have any bumps in the road, I think the odds go the other way quickly. So if you really want to get Wisconsin, you feeling good about them. Make sure you look after if they get swept in a weekend or put 3 losses in a row. That's the day to be. If every team's going to have bumps in the road. That we haven't seen a near undefeated team since 1993. So you're going to have teams that have some bumps along the way. That's the time to bet them is after the bump. You want to bet them when their stock is at the lowest. It's just like playing the stock market. You want to try to buy when the stock is at the lowest. You got to find a way to do that at the right time with these bets as well.
Which is ironic because then you'll have teams that hit the bump and their odds don't change all that much. Like I remember beginning of the season, Boston University was, I don't think BU's ever been more than plus 800 or plus 1,000 when you go back. And I didn't think at the beginning of the season were particularly strong. I didn't think they were number one caliber. We were like, all right, BU has to figure this out. I remember having either this podcast or on a TMQ with you, Jimmy, where I said, BU's got a problem. The problem in the back defensively. It was on this podcast. We were talking about the over-under, and I said, BU has a problem in back with its defense. They have to figure it out. And I kind of outlined why under betting wasn't great on BU, but the odds never really reflected it on them as a future, which was when they dipped back to 7, 8, 9 in the country, the people still believed or the odds makers at least still believed this team's gonna figure it out, and there wasn't much of a dip. So where you have some of those teams that maybe Wisconsin, who's going to rocket up to the top, and then when they hit their bump, backslide a bit, you have to be a little bit leery of teams that everybody's always going to believe in this year, which they always think are going to figure it out. The BUs of the world. BC was another one. Though for me, the thought of having BC and BU playing in a national championship in Minnesota is enough to make me a happy Bostonian, and really rub it in the face of Minnesotans everywhere if that happened, like the time that Minnesota had 2 teams in the Frozen Four in Boston. But from the same side, that's not going to change the odds, because I could have said before the season, hey, BC and BU might be there, and even if they hit the dip, I didn't particularly think the odds were going to change all that much on them.
We've got some teams that have moved up quite a bit with surprise seasons, or maybe not surprises, but maybe very good seasons so far. One of those is Maine. Earlier this week, Jim and I had an opportunity to talk with their head coach, Ben Barr, and he's got things going in the right direction there in Orono. When we go back to October, their future was at plus 7,500. Right now, they're at plus 1,500, which puts them in the top dozen or so.
I still think plus 1,500 is great value. I think they should be up maybe more around like plus 800, plus 900, to be honest with you. They're third in the pairwise right now. This is a team, and they've played some of their tough parts of their schedule. They played BC, they played BU, they played Quinnipiac. They've had some of the hardest games that they will face already. So think about that. When I look at what Maine has going forward, just trying to get their schedule up, but they've got in terms of league play, Connecticut, Lowell, UMass, 3 in a row. Those 6 games, all very winnable. Providence for 2 at home, New Hampshire for 2 on the road, Northeastern for 2 at home, Vermont for 2 on the road, and UMass. I mean, that is not the toughest murderer's row of a schedule. There's some tough teams in there. Don't get me wrong. Providence stands out to that. UMass, probably the close of the season, it could be tough. In New Hampshire, the rivalry, I still think, Maine handled them in the one game they've already played against each other. They manhandled them up in Orono. So I look at what's left for this Maine team. They should stay, in the top 5 of the pairwise. They should potentially be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. That alone would give me, reason to think 1,500 is still good value. I know 7,500 would have been unbelievable value if you believed in this team, but plus 1,500, that's a good number.
I think there are going to be teams like Maine that are hockey value bets that if you've been watching college hockey and you're a smart college hockey person, you're going to look at some of these odds and see several teams that you believe in from a college hockey standpoint that maybe don't have the name value on the open market. A lot of people, when it comes to college hockey, you're always going to recognize BU, North Dakota, Boston College, Michigan, even Quinnipiac being the defending national champion because they were all over, ESPN and all over the different podcasts over the summer. People are going to recognize those names. I think there are other names that are very good hockey teams that don't necessarily have the odds value, but will get into the tournament. And if you've been watching college hockey this year, you might feel good about placing a bet down. And for that, when I talk about recency bias against a team like North Dakota in the odds, and then people believing they're back, it's almost like there is no bias to them, or there is always bias against them, which is schools like a UMass. UMass just won a national championship a couple of years ago. They've gone through their transition. They're ninth in the pairwise, but you can get good value on UMass at plus 3,000 right now, and they're considered a top 10 team in the pairwise. That means that and if you've been following our poll and you've been following the pairwise, those top 10, 11 teams are so log jammed in the way that they switch out that it wasn't like last year when we had 5 teams all trading number one. Now you're seeing teams that in my poll, when I vote, like I could put 11 teams in the top 5. So when you're looking at teams like Providence, like UMass, like Western Michigan, another one, 11-4-1, and there is tremendous value that can be had there. Or a school like a UNH, you mentioned Maine being, looking at their value being low. UNH 8-4-1 is tied for 11th in the pairwise, needs to do a little work to shore up their spot. But in Hockey East, knowing what we know about Hockey East, you're looking at UNH at plus 5,000. And that to me is, you get hot the right time of year, you get into the tournament, you get the right, there is a lot of value on hockey bets that if you've been following, the casual bettor that's out there is only going to bet the schools that they know. And if you're a hockey person, you can almost find that edge just by having watched and learned and digested things from having seen the sport a little bit deeper.
Dan, you mentioned UNH. If it wasn't for the success Maine is having, everybody be talking about New Hampshire in Hockey East. And they've gone from plus 15,000 to plus 5,000, a great season for Mike Souza's team.
Yeah, and I guess the part is that I don't know how much that's going to wiggle for UNH either, because as good as they are, when they step into Hockey East play, it's almost like what we saw from UConn last year when UConn was a top 7 team. I thought at one point they were the best team in the country last year. But then UConn backslid in the second half. But I don't know what the odds were. But if you're betting, you're not trying to predict and say, oh, I really like what this team's doing, and hey, they could be the best team right now. You're not betting on the best team right now. So if you look at UNH and look down the second half of the season, when they're playing UConn, when they're playing Vermont, when they're playing Merrimack, when they're playing UMass and BC and ULowell, those are games that, depending on how those flow out, I don't know that the odds are going to shift all that much on UNH. But I think if they win the right ones, they're in the tournament. And if they're in the tournament, third or fourth best Hockey East team this year is as good a bet as anyone else to try and win it.
We've got one more team before we take a break that has gone up quite a bit. Mired with the also rans at plus 30,000 back in October. Now at 7,500 is RIT. They're 18th in the poll this week. They're 16th in the pairwise. They've got a big game coming up against Maine. What do you do with a team like RIT that's still probably pretty big long shot, although the only Atlantic team to make it to the Frozen Four?
Yeah, you still have to kind of go with some history here. Pizza money, maybe. This is like, max bet $50 to win a lot, to still win $37.50. But you can't go heavy. The reality is that nobody from Atlantic has reached a national championship game. Forget about winning. So you still have that hump to get over. And I think that, despite the fact that Wayne Wilson has been there, both as a player and a head coach, been to Frozen Fours, you still don't have the experience on any team. If this was, 2011 and you had just been there the year before and you have another hot team and you're making a run, I think it's different because all the players have gone through it. But to get to a Frozen Four is one thing. To win a Frozen Four is another thing. And you don't see a lot of teams make their first Frozen Four and then win a national championship. Union obviously did it, and I believe maybe Yale did not. I don't even think Union did it in their first Frozen Four. I think they had made an appearance. before that, and maybe Yale, that might have been their first Frozen Four. I can't remember, but it's rare, and those are really those are needles in a haystack type of moments. But it's worth the pizza money. That's as I like to call it, like the small change bet you want to make, $10, $20 maybe, if you're trying to think about it. Because I think that in terms of RIT, they're right now they're ready to run away with Atlantic hockey. They're in a great position within their own conference, and as long as they can survive the tournament, which is a big if, if they can put some wins together. Say they beat Maine out of the gate, win the Ledger Bank tournament in New Year's Eve there. If that happens, then they're probably putting themselves somewhere around 12 in the pairwise, and then they just have to keep being consistent in their league. Then they don't have to win their league championship. But we know historically, all but 1 year in the history of Atlantic hockey, you've had to win your league tournament. So you have to get through that gauntlet. It's not just putting together a nice season. They're in a good position right now, 16th in the pairwise, but they've got to find a way to solidify that a little bit more, just to take away the threat that you get bounced in a conference tournament.
Yeah, and for RIT standpoint, from a betting perspective, I don't know that the odds are going to shift at all on RIT moving forward. If you look within the numbers and you look within the name value and everything, RIT might be the best well-known Atlantic hockey team among college hockey people. But again, when you start to venture into the casual bettors who can really impact the odds on futures, the name value wise has always been a bit of an issue for Atlantic hockey. There's a whole bunch of schools that when they get to the tournament, you go, who are they? Until they beat a team, and then everyone buys their T-shirt. So unless it's Army and Air Force, so that's kind of the knock against Atlantic hockey. Though I think that is more of a 10 years ago knock than anything else. I think the league has gotten significantly better on its own local radar. The other problem facing RIT's odds are that of their opponents the rest of the way in conference, only one of them is not in the 50 to bottom range in the pairwise right now. The rest of them are 50 below. They have Bentley at 40. So shout out to Bentley on that one. I'll give the thumbs up that Bentley RIT in the annual Lurch Ed Rubin Cup, as we will have out in Rochester. But the rest of the schedule, when you look at Robert Morris, when you look at Niagara, Mercyhurst, Canisius, their Air Force, they're all between 50 and 63. So if RIT loses any of those games, they're going to tumble down, and then they have to win the conference tournament anyway. So from an odds standpoint, if you're betting RIT now, you're basically saying they're going to win out. Because if they start losing, the odds are, or this is as high as it's going to get. If you want to buy the dip, you basically just have to wait for them to lose a game, and then they'll fall back. Things will fall back. I don't even know that it's going to shift much off points 7,500. Might just stay the same.
We're going to take a look at some teams that sadly have gone in the wrong direction in the odds when we continue on USCHO Edge. Well, let's look at some teams that have faded a little bit since October. And one of those, we looked at a few before we started, but I'm going to throw one in here that we didn't mention, and that is Ohio State, that's gone from plus 2,500 in October to plus 4,000 now.
Yeah, the Big Ten's a really tough conference this year, and they're beating up on some of the I'm not going to call them bottom teams, maybe, so Penn State, Ohio State, odds on both have gone down. Penn State was 1,800. They're now 2,500. As you said, Ohio State was 2,500. They're now 4,000. The one that kind of surprises me, because I guess they've had a couple of good wins in there. Notre Dame went from 2,500 to 2,200. So it was almost staying the same, but still you're still looking at the actual odds and you're saying, okay, they think they have a better shot now than they did in October. I'm not surprised by any of these. Somebody in the Big Ten had to get beat up, and that was just reality. I'm trying to find Michigan State. So Michigan State was plus 3,500 back in October. They're now plus 1,500. So you see that it's almost like you can trade the values within the conference. as much as you've had to move certain teams up, they've taken the dollar value off of some of the other teams and moved them down. And it's all based on standings right now. I'm sure this is mostly AI generated. There's not a lot of human eyeballs looking at this day after day. In my guess, that's my guess. I don't work with these odds makers directly, so but my guess is it's a lot of computers that are helping generate these odds, and it's based. There is some name value. The fact that Harvard is still even kind of in the mix at plus 3,500, and you have Harvard say in front of let's see, Ohio State, you have Harvard in front of New Hampshire, you have Harvard in front of RIT, and significantly, that's all name recognition. And people saying, "Oh, I remember the year that Harvard made the Frozen Four." Yeah, that was 2017. It wasn't yesterday. They're always a good team. They always have a lot of draft picks, but this Harvard team is not the same Harvard team we've seen in years past. So there's still some name bias, but for the most part, we're seeing the computers do their jobs better right now.
I think when we say they're doing their job better, I agree. I think that risers and fallers will happen when we talk about bumps. Then there are teams with red flags. There's no bump. There's a red flag. Ohio State, like I said, someone has to lose in the Big Ten, and they're going to lose conference games, which is going to skew the record. And the Big Ten isn't going to get everybody in. So it's not just Big Ten tournament crowns a national champion. So I don't know how much to put stock on odds of a team that is in a smaller conference that we think is pretty good, that is probably better than the record indicates, but then comes out and has bad odds because they just keep losing games. So to me, it's are you looking for the bump or are you looking for a red flag? I don't know where to put it. When you mentioned Harvard, like the red flag is, all right, their odds didn't shift. They're a one-win team. That's a red flag in a conference that has, when you do a little bit of homework for this, that has a lot of teams down on the bottom of the pairwise right now. This is not ECAC's best work this year. So you're trying to factor all that in as you start doing some homework. It's really hard to figure out what to make on a team like Ohio State because we all think they're better than the record indicates. We think that, and same with Penn State, like we think that, the teams that are in the bottom two of the Big Ten's a really good league. I don't know what to make of it. Do I put stock on it? Penn State's a little better than Notre Dame. Notre Dame's in there. Where are the odds? It's really hard because Ohio State could conceivably go on a run. And is it a red flag that they're down at 26 and their odds have dropped so much? It's really, really difficult to put stock on some of the stuff with the AI, like you mentioned, and trying to figure it out. Like, I just don't know what to make of, is there going to be a regression to the mean? Is there going to be a team like Ohio State that gets a little bit better and still finishes with a subpar win-loss record and then goes out and wins the Big Ten? You can't predict any of that, but if you're looking at records, their odds are going to shift because they're just going to lose a lot of hockey games this year relative to the rest of the Big Ten.
Let's turn to Hockey East before we wrap up. 4 teams have slumped a bit. 3 of them are now at the bottom of the standings in Hockey East, and 1 is near the middle, and that's UConn. Let's look at how some of these teams have slipped. Northeastern took the biggest tumble from plus 3,000 to plus 7,500. UMass Lowell plus 4,000 to 7,500. UConn from plus 5,000 to plus 7,500, and Merrimack the same, plus 5,000 to plus 7,500. Do we see some of these teams being able to turn things around and maybe making some of these value right now?
Yes. I don't know how to predict which ones. That's the problem. I know Lowell has gone through a lot of injuries. I know Northeastern has gone through injuries. UConn, not so sure. I just think they've had some struggles. Same goes for Merrimack. Merrimack and UConn, those are your last 2 runners up in Hockey East the last 2 seasons, both of them losing 1-goal games in overtime. UMass Lowell is kind of a perennial contender, but they've slipped up here, and injuries have done a lot for that. Northeastern, same boat. But the interesting thing is that they've left all of them at plus 7,500. You don't see any of them going to plus 30,000 or plus 15,000. I think the reason is that because Hockey East is so strong, they're all sitting around the same place in the pairwise, which is right dead center. It's not like these teams are dropping to 58th in the pairwise. That's what is probably keeping their odds even higher than I would expect them. I'd love to tell anybody, here's the team I see making that second half run. I can't give that to you right now. I don't have even a good feeling that any of those 4 teams would. Same goes for Vermont. All in different places right now. Like, I actually feel like Vermont's an improved team last year to this year. But I wouldn't know where to put them odds wise right now. So is there some value there? Yes. Again, pizza money. Do you want to throw $10 on all 4 of those teams, hoping that one of them makes a huge run here in the second half? And then if you do, you're probably hot going into the Frozen Four. I go back to 2013 when UMass Lowell made their only Frozen Four. I think they only had 1 or 2 losses in the second half of the year after Christmas. They started out slow as anything, almost like this year's team. But that was a little different. That wasn't a bunch of injuries. That was trying to get a team to gel, a good team to gel. I don't know that any of these teams that we're talking about are in that situation right now.
No, and I guess I prefer to refer to all those teams as the yeah buts, which is every single one of those teams has a positive to overlay its negative, and a negative to overlay its positive. Northeastern is in dead last of Hockey East. Yeah, but they beat BC. And Northeastern was dealing with injuries, and they're very good. Like, we know they're a good team, and they're 1-8 in the conference, but they're also 5-8-1 overall. So everyone's winning games outside the conference of the veg. If Northeastern catches heat in the second half, you can't predict that, but no one's willing to kill their odds because, yeah, but they beat BC and they could be pretty good. Merrimack 2-6-1 and 10th. Yeah, but they're pretty good too. And I don't want to kill their odds. I don't want to push them down. UConn 4-6. Yeah, but they're tied for 6th with UMass, who's a better team and possibly could be, a team that gets in with an at-large. So now it's like if they go on a run UConn in the second half, now they're finishing third. Like there's all of these yeah buts that keep the odds from dropping too far, but also don't let them get too high. And all of those teams down the bottom, there is value in, but the problem is that every single one of them has the same story. So you don't want to pick what's a 1-6? What is that? What's that on 175? On 1 out of 6?
You really need to start being better at math.
Yeah, I'm terrible with math. I know that 1 out of 5 is 20%.
Yeah, keeps going.
Yeah, there we go. So let's just say a 17% chance of being right. I wouldn't take those odds, but you're not looking down the bottom of this and picking one of those teams and saying, yeah, I think they could do it. Yeah, but every single one of those teams is a yeah, but.
Well, with that, that's our look at the futures. We'll probably take another look in a month or a month and a half or so as things go forward. And we'll be back with this podcast when the schedule ramps back up after the semester break. For Jim Connelly, for Dan Rubin, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Edge.